Right, today I'm going to show you how to fit an Essex flange. The reason for fitting an Essex flange, or the reason that I want to do it today, is because I need to fit a pump. Now, the reason we fit a flange is for two reasons. Number one, it shows the pump has a dedicated feed to it. And when I mean a dedicated feed, what I mean is, let's say we're installing a pump for a shower. What happens is if somebody in the house is using that shower, they really don't want the flow to be taken away by somebody else switching on a hot tap somewhere else in the house. So that's why we fit a flange. The other reason to fit a flange is to stop any air bubbles getting inside the pump, which we don't want at all. So a flange basically eradicates that. Now, without boring you to death, there are lots of different types of flanges. I'm going with the Essex flange, which is this one here. That's a side entry flange. There are numerous different names for them. You can get a Stuart flange, which is perhaps a little bit easier to fit, albeit harder to come by, harder to source. Or you can get a flange that sits on the top. Now, the reason I'm not going to use one of those in this instance is because this is an old cylinder. And the cylinders are actually very thin, even though they're made of copper, they're very, very thin. And if I was fitting a new cylinder, I would perhaps put a flange on the top because the threads would all be clean, it wouldn't have any lime scale on it. I'm just a bit worried if I try and take this flange off now, there's going to be so much scale that you can actually break the cylinder, and what should be a relatively small job can actually result in replacing the whole cylinder, which is really not something that I particularly want to do. So I'm going for the side entry. Now, there's no two ways about it. This involves drilling into the side of a hot water cylinder, which does seem like a really daunting thing to do. And as I said before, I'm working on the assumption that you've never done this before, so it is going to be daunting. So I'm going to try and take you through it step by step and give you instructions along the way. Now, first of all, you'll notice that the foam casing on the cylinder, that's just insulation. That's just there to keep your hot water warm. I've already taken it off. It's very, very easy. All I did was I cut a square with my Stanley knife. As you can see here, it comes away pretty easily. And I've done that to expose the copper, which is there. Now, when I drill through the tank, I'm going to be using a hole cutter to do it. But a flange comes in a packet, and my one came in a box. Now, what I want to do is cut a hole that's big enough that I can feed this through and drop it in, but small enough that this will be able to go on the other side and create a seal once the rubber is on it. As I say, it's really, really daunting. So as the old saying goes, measure twice, cut once. You can't get this wrong. If this goes wrong, you're going to have to get a new cylinder. There's no two ways about it here. So you really can't measure up, double check, triple check too many times. Basically, if this is going through there, it's too big. Okay? What you need to do is in fact, what I'll do is I'll edit in some pictures of the flange and the makeup of it itself. But what I've done is I'll put that onto there, and I've drawn a hole around it. Okay, so I'm just going to go for it now, but there's one really, really important thing to do before you even attempt doing this. Number one, you need to switch off your feed to the cylinder. What that means in real terms is make sure there is no more water going into this cylinder. On here we've got a gate valve. There's also a gate valve in the loft. I've switched both off. So at that point, no more water can get into this cylinder. I've opened the kitchen taps downstairs, but all that will do is just take the very, very top perhaps inch of water away from this cylinder. It's not going to drain the whole cylinder of its water. So what I've actually done is down by the side of this, maybe I'll do a separate video on this, is I've drained the cylinder by using the drain off valve. I've run a hose through the house to the outside of the house, and I know now that this cylinder is empty. If you don't do that, then you'll find yourself drilling into here. Water, and very, very hot water, will come squirting out, and you're going to have a major problem on your hands. So, as I say, make sure the water is switched off. Realistically, you should be getting a plumbing professional to do this job. But if you are tackling it yourself, water off. If it makes you feel any better, turn the stopcock off and drain all the tanks anyway. Okay? Right, I'm just going to go for it here. Here's my hole cutter. I'm going to go right in the very centre here and drill Okay, so my pilot hole is through. You can see that there. We'd know about it if there was water in there because it would come streaming out now. So I'm going to go all the way through, and hopefully this hole saw is actually going to catch that little bit of metal. If it does fall in, it's not the end of the world, but we don't want it to ideally. There we go. There's the hole. Again, as I say, it's quite a daunting thing to do, even though I've done this numerous times. But it's going to get more daunting. In fact, you're probably going to watch this video, and I'll probably completely put you off the idea, and you'll be phoning somebody up to do it now. I've shown you the composition of the flange itself. Now, I've got a wire through here. You've got to keep your hand on this for the whole duration. If you let this go, again, you're in a lot of trouble. And I certainly will be in a lot of trouble because the supplier that I got this part off only had one left in stock. So if I get this wrong, there really is no going. There's no going back. Basically, the customer will not have any water until I can source a new part. Now, what you need to do is you need to feed this in. And you'll just see here, you've got to work it in a little bit. And just make sure that that's engaged. So I'll put that in. Now this is going to sound absolutely ridiculous. Whilst keeping hold of it, I'm going to drop this into there. Now, as I say, if you let go, you're in a lot of trouble. Now, that's just dangling there. The reason that's dangling inside is when I need to, I'm going to pull that and come back this way. Okay, so the next thing I'm about to do, you'll notice that there are two of these washers. One of them has a split in it. And it has a split in it for a very good reason. Because obviously you'll see there's no way we're going to get that through that hole there. So here's what happens. Again, keep hold of the wire. And what we do is hopefully you can just see the split here. I'm going to start feeding that all the way in. Now, all I can to give you a description here, it's a bit like putting your keys on your key ring. You know when you have one of these things, you're just feeding it round in a very, very similar way until that goes all the way in. And now that's inside. Keep a really tight hold on it. And you can see now it's tricky. It's tricky and it's fiddly. There's no two ways about it. There it is. So if I pull that forward now, you can see that goes in there. Keep hold of it. We've not finished yet. We need another washer. One of these, but this is a rubber washer rather than a copper one, but this needs to go on the inside as well. Otherwise we're not going to create the seal. Now I would say at this point, I would get a little file on that. My file is typically just over here. Just take away any rough edges that you can. Now realistically, this is something I should have done before I dropped this in there, but my error on that score. What we don't want it to do, we don't want it to be anything too sharp on there, that it cuts inside and cuts into that rubber too much. In fact, I can just feel a little bit. Just there. That's much better. Much, much better. Okay, I'm going to feed this rubber down. And because it's rubber, I'm just going to be able to pop that, just give it a squeeze and pop it in. There we go. Again, I'm going to try and put that over the thread that's in there. Not quite. Pull it through. And there it is. So that's going to create a really good seal on there. Trust me. But we're not done yet. Keep holding on to it. Okay, so we want another rubber washer, but this is going to go on this side to create a seal. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come check it out and just make sure that everything's in the absolute correct position. You can't check this sort of thing too many times. If you do this correctly, you shouldn't need any compounds, any leak sealers or anything like that. It should just all fit really snugly and it should just work. What I'm going to try not to do now is move this left or right or up or down too much. I take the final copper washer, the one without the split in it, and place it there. Again, don't let go, it will fall directly through and again you're in trouble. This is what's going to give you a little bit of security. This is your nut. It's a threaded nut. It's going to go over that thread. Once that is on, I'll feel a lot more secure about it. Hopefully you can see that. I'm just spinning that on. And that's now in position. It needs tightening up, but it's not going anywhere. Now, so what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to get some grips on that. You're going to need to tighten that up. I know these are the wrong size. I'll tighten it up myself in a second. You see, these ones are a little bit too small. I'll get some bigger ones in a minute. But what I'm going to do is just tighten that up with these grips here. Now, in fact, I'll do that now. Okay, so hopefully you can see that's nice and tight now. What you don't want to do is once it's tightened, is put too much pressure on it. I can already see that the rubbers behind are starting to squeeze, which is really what I want. But this is quite brittle. The copper's quite thin. It's easily broken. We don't want to cause a brand new job on this. Right, okay. I've seen people do this two ways. Firstly, bearing in mind it's only metal inside here. There's no actually working or moving components inside the cylinder. I've seen many people just let this go and drop into the bottom, which is not something I really want to do. You can pull it through. It's a bit tricky, and you've got to try and get that balance between feeling the wire bend, using enough brute force, but not so much that you're going to bend the cylinder. And I've just done it, just there, and that's now out. Okay, so what do we do now? Well, there's two things we do. At the moment, this isn't really a flange because whilst it's giving us a dedicated feed, at the top, if somebody opens up a tap downstairs, for instance, in the kitchen to run some hot water, it's going to come out of this pipe, run along here, down here, and down to the kitchen. So in effect, we have a separate feed, so the shower would come out of here, and the kitchen hot water would come out of here. But it's still not doing the other aspect that we need a flange to do, which is eradicate air bubbles. So, I've just got some 22mm pipe here. Now, the 22mm pipe just pops inside there. But that won't do it. If you just put that pipe in like that, it still will do the other part of the job, which is to get rid of the air bubbles. So what you actually do is you cut one end of the pipe at an angle. Just like that. Now you need to make sure this is completely deburred and filed before it goes in, otherwise you're going to have trouble. Now what this actually does is, if you can imagine, this is inside the tank. So if we were going inside the tank from this angle, as the water heats up it creates air bubbles. And as the air bubbles rise, they go around this tapered edge. So none of the air bubbles actually go into the pipe. And if they don't go into the pipe, then they don't go into the pump. And that is precisely what we want. So I would put this in about so far, about halfway, just less, through the cylinder. Now, this is really important because when you're tightening it up, you do not want, as you're tightening, it to twist. So what I always do is just with a pencil, is I just mark the top. So I always know that as long as the pencil mark is facing up, then this is there. If it does that, it won't do its job. If it goes that way, it certainly won't do its job because it's actually going to capture the air bubbles as they rise. It's going to catch on that lip, go inside the pipe, and then go inside the pump. So I've got my pencil marks right there. Maybe do them a little bit more pronounced. And I will just feed that inside. Okay, it's far longer than I need at the moment. But what happens is at the very last bit here that we're going to do is the compression joint that very much comes with it. Now, with your compression joint, you're going to want to put some compound on there, some jointing compound. Which I've got there. That's ugly. Will I get any more out of this one? I may well do. Not much left. Okay. There's my jointing compound. Jointing compound is going to go inside here. And I'm going to pop the ring back on. And then what happens is, with the ring goes round, just round there. And when I tighten that, the ring is going to compress. And as the ring compresses, it squeezes around the pipe. As it squeezes around the pipe, that compound, that gunk that I've just put in, it's going to fill any gaps just to stop it leaking this side. Now I'm only going to tighten it up so much, because if I over tighten this nut, then it's going to start that spinning, and I don't want that to spin at the moment. So we want it tight enough to make a seal, but not so tight that will damage the work we've done already. You've got to get a feel for it, and I can feel that's pretty good. Anything more than that, I'm sort of using too much strength, too much power. If you do over tighten it anymore, make sure you get a pair of grips on this section here. Sorry, I'm working in such a confined space here. It's hard to keep everything to hand. So if I was going to tighten that anymore, I'd get some grips there, so as that doesn't move. Now maybe give it one last tighten. But you need to be careful there, because remember I made the pencil mark at the top? That's got to stay at the top, because then we know that's in the correct position. One final thing I'll do, and I'm going to hold this steady whilst I do it, is now I know I've got enough leeway there, I'm going to take my pipe slice, I'm going to cut this pipe. It moved around in there then, but again, that's why the pencil mark is important. I know that's moved, so I'm going to move that back. And again, give it another little tighten, because it's clearly a little bit too loose. That's cut off there now. Only one more thing to do, and then we're ready to connect it to the pump, which I won't show you because it was all about fitting the flange. But we can't fill the cylinder back up yet, because there's still a massive hole right in the side of it. Okay, here I've got a push fit lever valve. You can see that there. If I turn the lever, it just lets the water through. Hopefully, if you can see light through there each time I do it. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to push this on there, but don't make the mistake here. We've not fully tightened that yet. It'd be very easy to over push that, and if it's not tightened properly, you end up pushing that all the way through, and you've undone most of your good work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get some grips onto here, just hold it slightly, and that's on. There we go. It really is not as daunting as it seems. Now what I'm going to do is, when I put this on, I'm going to create a little brace for this, because what we don't want to do is it to cause too much movement on there. So this needs to be fixed. I'll put a little bit of timber on there, make a little frame for it, and I'm going to put the pump directly underneath here. But what you have now is a working Essex flange, which is going to give you a dedicated feed for your shower pump. The next step I'm going to do, which I won't bore you with now, is I'm going to open up that gate valve. I'm going to open up the gate valve upstairs, and I'm going to close the drain off valve at the bottom, so the cylinder is ready to go. We'll fill it up, and then if we see any leaks, anything untoward there, we can just give things a little tighten up. But there you go. That is how you fit an Essex flange. Not quite as daunting as you thought it might be, I think.